I was playing with myself. Then my best friend entered. The controller slipped from my sweaty palms as I died for the third time in a row. I groaned, tossing it onto the couch beside me, and leaned back against the cushions. The afternoon sun streamed through my apartment windows, casting long shadows across the hardwood floor. I'd been at this game for hours, trying to beat a level that seemed impossible. My frustration was mounting with each failed attempt. I picked up the controller again, cracking my knuckles before diving back in. The music swelled as my character respawned, and I was so focused on the screen that I didn't hear the key turning in my front door lock. I didn't hear the footsteps in the hallway. I was completely absorbed in the game, my tongue poking out slightly in concentration, when I heard his voice, still stuck on that boss fight. Ethan's familiar laugh filled my living room, warm and teasing. I jumped so hard I nearly dropped the controller again, my heart hammering against my ribs. Jesus, Ethan. I spun around to find my best friend leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed, a knowing smirk on his face. You gave me your spare key for emergencies, remember? He pushed off the frame and walked toward me, his tall frame moving with that easy confidence I'd always envied. And watching you die repeatedly apparently qualifies as an emergency? He dropped onto the couch beside me, close enough that I could smell his call in something woodsy, and clean that. I'd never quite been able to identify. I tried to focus back on the screen, but I was suddenly hyper-aware of how close he was sitting. Our thighs were almost touching, separated by mere inches. I've almost got it, I muttered, gripping the controller tighter. Just need to time the dodge roll better. Ethan leaned forward, his shoulder brushing against mine as he studied my technique. You're being too aggressive, he said, his voice closer to my ear than I expected. Watch when he winds up for that overhead slam. You need to roll toward him, not away. His hand came up to point at the screen, and I found myself watching his fingers instead of the game. Long, slightly calloused fingers that gestured as he explained the strategy I'd been missing. I died again. Ethan laughed, the sound rumbling through his chest, and before I could protest, he plucked the controller from my hands. Here, let me show you. Our fingers brushed during the exchange, and I felt a jolt of something I couldn't quite name run up my arm. I settled back into the couch, trying to ignore the way my pulse had quickened. Watching Ethan play was mesmerizing. His green eyes narrowed in concentration, his jaw set with determination. His fingers moved across the controller with practiced ease. He made it look effortless, dodging and attacking with perfect timing. Within minutes, he'd beaten the boss I'd been struggling with all afternoon. See? He grinned at me, that boyish smile that had gotten him out of trouble since we were kids. Easy, Shof, I muttered, but I was smiling too. This was us comfortable, easy, the way we'd always been since we met freshman year of college. 5 years later, and Ethan was still the person I wanted to spend all my free time with. Still the person who could read my moods with a single glance, who brought me coffee without asking, who had a key to my apartment. Ethan settled deeper into the couch, stretching his long legs out and letting his head fall back against the cushions. So what's the plan for tonight? He asked, rolling his head to look at me. Please tell me we're not staying in again. You've been holed up in this apartment for like a week straight. He wasn't wrong. Work had been overwhelming lately, and I'd fallen into a pattern of coming home and hiding from the world. I don't know, I said, running a hand through my hair. There's that new bar that opened downtown. Marcus was telling me about it. The moment I mentioned Marcus's name, something shifted in Ethan's expressions, something quick and unreadable that was gone before. I could analyze it. Marcus, huh? Ethan's tone was casual, but there was an edge to it I couldn't quite place. You two have been hanging out a lot lately. It wasn't a question, and I felt suddenly defensive, though I wasn't sure why. Marcus was a guy from work, friendly and easy to talk to, and we'd grabbed lunch a few times. He's a friend, I said simply. Like you. But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't the same. Nothing was quite like what Ethan and I had, this deep, comfortable intimacy that came from years of shared history. Late-night conversations, inside jokes, the ability to communicate with just a look. I'd never questioned it before, never really examined what it meant. Ethan was quiet for a moment, his eyes still on me. Then he sat up abruptly, that easy smile back in place. Well, if we're going out, you need to change. You've been wearing that shirt for like 2 days. He reached over and tugged at my t-shirt sleeve, his fingers grazing my arm. Come on, I'll help you pick something out. I can dress myself, I protested, but I was already standing, acutely aware of how close we were. Ethan had to tilt his head back slightly to look up at me, and for a second our eyes locked. Something passed between USA Spark, a moment of connection that felt different from our usual banter. My breath caught in my throat. Then Ethan stood too, and the moment broke. He was taller than me by a few inches, and he used that height advantage to ruffle my hair like he always did. Like I was still the awkward college freshman he'd befriended at orientation. Humor me, he said, already heading toward my bedroom. Besides, when was the last time you actually went through your closet? I followed him down the hallway, trying to shake off the strange feeling that had settled over me. This was Ethan, my best friend, my person. There was nothing different about today. Nothing changed. So why did my apartment suddenly feel too small, the air too warm? Why was I noticing things I'd never paid attention to before? The way his jeans fit, the line of his shoulders, the curve of his smile. In my bedroom, Ethan was already rifling through my closet with the ease of someone who'd been here 1,000 times before. He pulled out a dark blue button-down I'd forgotten I owned and tossed it at me. This one, he declared. It brings out your eyes. I caught the shirt, my cheeks warming at the compliment. Did Ethan always notice things like that? You think? I held the shirt up, examining it uncertainly. Isn't it a little much for just a bar? But Ethan was shaking his head, stepping closer to take the shirt from my hands. He held it up against my chest, his knuckles brushing against my collarbone through my t-shirt. I froze, every nerve ending suddenly aware of his proximity. Trust me, Ethan said softly, his eyes moving from the shirt to my face. We were standing so close I could see the small scar on his chin from a skateboarding accident in high school. Ah! Could count the flecks of gold in his green eyes. My heart was doing something irregular in my chest, a staccato rhythm that made it hard to breathe. You'll look good. I stepped back quickly, needing space, needing air. Okay, I said, my voice coming out rougher than intended. I'll wear the shirt. Now get out so I can change. Expected him to argue, to tease me like he always did. But instead, Ethan just nodded. His expression was unreadable as he headed for the door, pausing in the doorway to glance back at me. Take your time, he said quietly. Then he was gone, pulling the door closed behind him. I was left standing in my bedroom with my heart racing and my hands shaking slightly as I unbuttoned my t-shirt. What the hell was happening to me? This was Ethan, my best friend. The person I told everything to, the one constant in my chaotic life. I changed into the blue shirt. My movements mechanical as my mind raced. Maybe I was just tired. Maybe I'd been spending too much time alone, and my brain was playing tricks on me. That had to be it, because the alternative that I was seeing Ethan differently. Feeling things I'd never allowed myself to acknowledge was too complicated, too terrifying to consider. I couldn't risk what we had. I wouldn't. When I emerged from the bedroom, Ethan was back on the couch, scrolling through his phone. He looked up when he heard me, and his eyes widened slightly. See, he said, standing up and walking toward me. I told you that shirt would work. He reached out and straightened my collar, his fingers lingering at my neck for just a moment too long. Perfect. The word hung in the air between us, weighted with something I couldn't name. I wanted to step closer, wanted to lean into his touch, and that realization sent panic shooting through me. We should go, I said abruptly, grabbing my wallet and keys from the table. Before it gets too crowded, Ethan studied me for a second. A small frown creasing his forehead, but then he nodded. The bar was downtown. A trendy place with exposed brick walls and dim lighting that made everything feel intimate and close. Marcus had been right, it was the kind of place that drew a young professional crowd. People laughing over craft cocktails and small plates. Ethan and I found seats at the bar, our shoulders touching in the crowded space, and ordered drinks from a bartender with an elaborate mustache. So Ethan said, taking a sip of his whiskey, "Tell me about this Marcus guy." There was that edge again in his voice, subtle but unmistakable. I turned to look at him, but he was staring straight ahead, his profile sharp in the low light. "What do you want to know?" I asked carefully. "Like I said, he's just a friend. We work together." Ethan swirled his drink, the ice clinking against the glass. "Are you interested in him?" The question was so direct, so unlike Ethan's usual teasing approach, that I blinked in surprise. "What? No, why would you?" I stopped, genuinely confused. "Why are you asking me that?" Ethan finally looked at me, his green eyes intense in a way that made my stomach flip. "You've been different lately," he said quietly, barely audible over the bar noise. "Distracted, distant, I thought maybe ... He trailed off, shaking his head. "Never mind. Forget I said anything." But I couldn't forget it. The words had opened something between us, a crack in the easy facade we'd always maintained. I found myself leaning closer, needing him to hear me clearly. "I'm not interested in Marcus," I said firmly. "He's just a coworker. Ethan, that's all." Relief flashed across Ethan's face, quick and unmistakable. And suddenly I was hyper-aware of every point where our bodies were touching shoulder to shoulder, thigh to thigh on the narrow bar stools. The air felt charged, electric with something unspoken. "Good," Ethan said softly. "That's good." We stayed like that for a moment, locked in each other's gaze, the bar noise fading to a dull hum around us. I felt like I was standing on the edge of something vast and terrifying, like one more word, one more look, would send me tumbling over. Then someone jostled Ethan from behind, breaking the spell, and we both turned back to our drinks. The moment shattered. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of forced normalcy. We talked about work, about mutual friends, about everything except the tension that had settled between us like a living thing. When Ethan laughed at something I said, I found myself watching his mouth, wondering what it would feel like against mine. When his hand brushed mine, reaching for the drink menu, electricity sparked up my arm. I was losing my mind. By the time we left the bar, I was wound so tight I thought I might snap. The night air was cool against my flushed skin, and I gulped it down gratefully as we walked toward the parking garage. Ethan was quiet beside me, his hands shoved deep in his pockets, his expression thoughtful. Neither of us spoke, the silence stretching between us like a tightrope. Finally, we reached my car. "That was fun," I said, the words sounding hollow even to my own ears. Ethan nodded, but he didn't move toward his own car, which was parked a few spaces down. Instead, he stood there looking at me with an expression I couldn't read. The parking garage lights cast shadows across his face, making him look older, more serious than I'd ever seen him. "Can I ask you something?" Ethan's voice was low, almost hesitant. I nodded, my heart already racing before he'd even spoken. He took a step closer, eliminating the careful distance we'd been maintaining all evening. "Have you ever wondered ... He stopped, seemed to gather courage. "Have you ever thought about us? About what we are?" The question hung in the air between us, impossible to ignore or deflect. My mouth went dry, my palms sweating despite the cool night air. "What do you mean?" I managed, though I knew exactly what he meant. I could see it in his eyes and the vulnerable set of his shoulders. Ethan reached up and ran a hand through his hair, a nervous gesture I'd seen 1,000 times. I mean ... He took another step closer, so close now, I could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "I mean that sometimes lately when I'm with you, I feel like there's something more happening. Something different from how it used to be." His eyes searched mine, looking for understanding, for confirmation. "Tell me I'm not crazy. Tell me you feel it too." My breath caught in my throat. Every instinct told me to deflect, to laugh it off, to protect the friendship that meant everything to me. But standing there in the dim parking garage with Ethan looking at me like I was the only person in the world, I couldn't lie. "I feel it," I whispered. "God, Ethan, I feel it, and it terrifies me." Something shifted in Ethan's expression, relief, joy, fear, all mixed together in a way that made him look achingly vulnerable. He lifted his hand slowly, giving me time to pull away, and cupped my cheek. His palm was warm against my skin, his thumb brushing along my cheekbone with infinite gentleness. "Why does it terrify you?" he asked softly. His breath ghosted across my face, and I realized how close we were standing. "'Cause I don't want to lose you," I admitted, my voice breaking slightly. You're my best friend. You're the most important person in my life. If we do this, if we cross this line, and it doesn't work out. I couldn't finish the sentence. Couldn't voice the fear that had been keeping me awake at night since I'd first acknowledged what I was feeling. Ethan's other hand came up to frame my face, holding me gently between his palms. And what if it does work out? He asked. What if this is what we've been moving toward all along, and we've just been too scared to see it? His eyes moved to my lips, then back to my eyes, asking permission for something neither of us had ever dared to name. I wanted to close the distance between us. Every fiber of my being was screaming at me to lean in, to find out what his lips tasted like, to finally cross that invisible line we'd been dancing around. But fear held me frozen, paralyzed by the magnitude of what this meant. Ethan, I breathed, not sure if it was a protest or a plea. His name on my lips felt different now, charged with new meaning. We don't have to do anything you're not ready for, Ethan said softly, but he didn't move away. His thumbs continued their gentle caress of my cheekbones, anchoring me to this moment. I just needed you to know. I needed to say it out loud, because keeping it inside was killing me. His vulnerability was raw and honest, and it made my chest ache with a feeling too big to contain. I closed my eyes, trying to process everything that was happening. When I opened them again, Ethan was still there, still looking at me with that mixture of hope and fear that mirrored my own feelings exactly. I need time, I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. It's a lot, and I need to think. I hated the way his face fell, hated that I was the cause of that hurt, but Ethan nodded, letting his hands drop from my face slowly, reluctantly. Okay, he said, taking a step back. The loss of his warmth left me cold. Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere. He tried to smile, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. I'll talk to you later. It was phrased as a question, uncertain in a way Ethan rarely was. Yeah, I managed. Later. I watched him walk to his car, watched him drive away, and then I sat in my own car for 20 minutes. My forehead pressed against the steering wheel, trying to make sense of a world that had suddenly tilted on its axis. Everything I thought I knew about myself, about us, had been called into question with a single conversation. The next few days passed in a fog of confusion and self-examination. I threw myself into work, taking on extra projects to keep my mind occupied, but thoughts of Ethan invaded every quiet moment. I replayed our conversation in the parking garage on an endless loop, analyzing every word, every gesture. The feel of his hands on my face haunted me, the gentleness of his touch, the vulnerability in his eyes. Ethan texted me every day normal messages about nothing important, maintaining our usual rhythm. But I could feel the weight of unspoken words behind every casual "how's your day" and saw this and thought of you. I responded, keeping my messages light and friendly, but each exchange felt like walking through a minefield. We were both being so careful, so deliberate, that it felt worse than not talking at all. On the fourth day, I found myself at Marcus's desk during lunch, picking at a salad I had no appetite for. He'd been trying to make conversation, but I was clearly distracted, my mind 1,000 miles away. Finally, he set down his sandwich and looked at me directly. Okay, what's going on? He asked. You've been like a zombie all week. I debated lying, brushing him off with some excuse about work stress, but I was tired of carrying this weight alone. And Marcus had proven himself to be a good friend in the months we'd known each other. If you had feelings for your best friend, I started slowly, someone you've known for years, they told you they felt the same way, what would you do? Marcus's eyebrows rose, understanding dawning on his face. Is this about Ethan? He asked gently. I must have looked shocked because he laughed. Come on, man. You talk about him constantly. And I saw how he looked at you that night at the bar. He barely took his eyes off you the whole evening. I hadn't even realized Marcus had noticed us that night. It's complicated, I said weakly. We've been friends for so long. What if we try this, and it ruins everything? Marcus was quiet for a moment, considering his words carefully. Can I tell you something? He said finally. The way you two are with each other? That's not just friendship. That's something rare. And yeah, maybe it doesn't work out. Maybe it's messy and complicated. But what if you never try? You'll spend the rest of your life wondering, what if? His words hit me like a physical blow, because he was right. I'd been so focused on the potential for loss that I hadn't considered what I might be losing by not taking the chance. Every moment I spent in fear was a moment I could have spent. What? Being happy? Being with Ethan in a way that was honest about what we were becoming? The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying. That evening, I finally let myself examine the feelings I'd been pushing down. I thought about Ethan. I really thought about him, and all the ways he'd been woven into the fabric of my life. The inside jokes and shared history, yes, but also the way my heart lifted when I saw his name on my phone. The way I saved funny stories to tell him later. The way no day felt complete until we'd talked. When had that stopped being just friendship? I realized, with a clarity that stole my breath, that I was in love with Ethan. Maybe I had been for years, too afraid to acknowledge it, too comfortable in the safety of friendship to risk the leap into something more. But Ethan had already leaped. He'd been brave enough to voice what I'd been hiding from, and I'd asked him to wait while I figured out what he'd already known. The thought made my chest tight with regret. I picked up my phone before I could second-guess myself. My fingers trembled slightly as I typed out a message. "Can you come over? We need to talk." The moment I hit send, my heart started racing. There was no taking it back now, no more hiding. Ethan's response came almost immediately. On my way. Two simple words that set every nerve ending in my body on fire. This was happening. I was doing this. I spent the 20 minutes until Ethan arrived, pacing my apartment like a caged animal, alternating between excitement and panic. I rehearsed what I wanted to say, then discarded every practiced line as inadequate. How did you tell your best friend that you'd figured out you were in love with them? That you wanted to try being more than what you'd been, despite the risk, despite the fear? When the knock came at my door, I froze for a second before forcing my feet to move. I opened the door to find Ethan standing there, looking nervous and hopeful and beautiful in the hallway light. He was wearing the gray t-shirt I'd always liked on him, his hair slightly mussed-light. He'd been running his hands through it. Our eyes met, and suddenly all my carefully considered words evaporated. "Hi," I said stupidly. Ethan smiled, but it was tentative, uncertain. "Hi," he echoed. Neither of us moved for a moment, the air between us charged with anticipation and anxiety. Then Ethan stepped forward, and I moved back automatically, letting him into my apartment. He walked past me, his familiar cologne enveloping me for a moment, and suddenly I couldn't remember why I'd ever thought this was a bad idea. I closed the door and turned to find Ethan standing in the middle of my living room, his hands shoved in his pockets, his shoulders tense. "So," he said softly, "you wanted to talk?" His voice was carefully neutral, but I could see the hope and fear warring in his eyes. He was trying to protect himself, I realized, preparing for the possibility that I was going to let him down gently. "I'm sorry," I blurted out. Ethan's eyebrows rose, and I rushed to continue before he could misunderstand. "I'm sorry it took me so long to figure this out. I'm sorry I made you wait while I worked through my fear." Took a step toward him, my heart hammering against my ribs. "You were brave enough to say something, and I panicked." Ethan was watching me intently now, his body still, but his eyes tracking my every movement as I closed the distance between us. "And now?" he asked quietly. "Have you worked through your fear?" His voice was barely above a whisper, like he was afraid speaking too loudly would shatter this fragile moment between us. I could see his chest rising and falling with quick, shallow breaths. "I'm still scared," I admitted, stopping just inches from him. Close enough to touch, close enough to see the individual lashes framing his green eyes. "I'm terrified, actually. But I realized something this week." I lifted my hand slowly, mirroring what he'd done in the parking garage, and laid my palm against his cheek. He leaned into the touch, his eyes fluttering closed for a brief second. "I'm more afraid of never knowing what this could be." Ethan's eyes opened, and they were shining with an emotion so intense it made my breath catch. "What are you saying?" he asked, even though I could tell he knew, could see it written all over my face. But he needed to hear the words, needed me to be as brave as he had been. I understood that, respected it. So I took a deep breath and said what I'd been too afraid to acknowledge. "I'm saying I have feelings for you," I said, my voice stronger now, more certain. "I'm saying that when you're not around, I feel like something's missing. I'm saying that I think about you constantly. I notice things like what you're wearing and how you smell and the way you laugh." My thumb brushed across his cheekbone. "I'm saying that I'm in love with you, Ethan, and I think maybe I have been for a while." The words hung between us for a heartbeat, 2 heartbeats. Then Ethan's face broke into a smile so brilliant it was like the sun coming out after days of rain. His hands came up to grip my waist, pulling me closer until our bodies were flush against each other. "Say it again," he whispered, his forehead pressing against mine. Our noses bumped softly, our breaths mingling in the small space between us. "I love you," I repeated, and this time the words came easily, naturally. "I love you." Ethan's hands tightened on my waist, and he let out a shaky laugh that sounded suspiciously close to a sob. "I love you too," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "God, I've loved you for so long." I thought I was going crazy, thought I was seeing things that weren't there. "They were there," I assured him. "I was just too scared to see them. But I'm not scared anymore." It wasn't entirely truth. There was still a thread of fear running through me, awareness of how much I was risking. But it was overshadowed by something stronger, something that felt like rightness, like coming home. I'd been running from this, from us, and I was tired of running. Ethan pulled back just enough to look at me fully, his eyes searching my face like he was memorizing every detail. "Can I?" He started, then stopped, his gaze dropping to my lips. "Can I kiss you?" The question was asked so softly, so tentatively, that it made my heart ache. After everything we'd shared, everything we'd admitted, he was still making sure I was comfortable, still giving me the choice. Instead of answering with words, I closed the remaining distance between us. Our lips met softly at first, a gentle exploration that sent sparks cascading through my entire body. Ethan made a small sound in the back of his throat, his hands sliding from my waist to my back, pulling me impossibly closer. I threaded my fingers through his hair, angling my head to deepen the kiss, and it felt like everything clicked into place. Kissing Ethan was like nothing I'd ever experienced before. It was familiar and new all at once, like a song I'd known my whole life, suddenly played in a different key. His lips were soft, his kiss both gentle and passionate, a perfect reflection of who he was. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, I realized I was smiling so wide my cheeks hurt. Ethan was grinning too, his eyes bright and happy. That was as I started, but I couldn't find adequate words. Ethan laughed, the sound full of joy and relief. "Yeah," he agreed. "It really was." He pressed another quick kiss to my lips, then another, like he couldn't quite believe he was allowed to do this now. I understood the feeling. I wanted to touch him, kiss him, hold him, just to prove to myself that this was real. We ended up on the couch, wrapped around each other, talking softly about everything and nothing. Ethan told me about when he first realized his feelings had changed, how he'd spent months trying to convince himself it was just a phase, that it would pass. I told him about my own confusion, the way I'd been attributing what I felt to stress or loneliness, anything but the truth. We laughed at our own obliviousness, at all the times we'd danced around this. "Everyone knew," Ethan admitted at one point. "My sister asked me last Christmas when I was going to finally tell you how I felt," I groaned, hiding my face against his shoulder. "Marcus told me today that it was obvious," I confessed. Apparently, we were fooling no one but ourselves. Ethan's chest rumbled with laughter, and I felt the vibration against my cheek. It was intimate in a way that had nothing to do with physical attraction, just the comfort of being close to someone you loved. As the evening wore on, we migrated to the bedroom, not for anything beyond the need to be comfortable and close. We lay facing each other on top of the covers, our hands intertwined between us, talking in the way we always had, but with a new openness, a new honesty. Every few minutes, one of us would lean forward to kiss the other, unable to resist the pull now that we'd finally given in to it. "I don't want to leave," Ethan murmured, at some point, his thumb tracing patterns on the back of my hand. The room was dark now, lit only by the streetlight filtering through my curtains. "Then stay," I said simply. "You did." We fell asleep like that, fully clothed and wrapped around each other, years of unspoken feelings finally given voice. It felt like the most natural thing in the world. I woke up to sunlight and the realization that everything had changed. Ethan was still asleep beside me, his face peaceful and younger in sleep, and I took a moment just to watch him. My best friend. The person I loved. Both things were true now, and neither negated the other. If anything, the friendship made the love stronger, gave it a foundation that felt unshakable. The next few weeks passed in a blur of happiness and adjustment. We told our friends, who universally responded with some variation of "finally," or "we knew already." My coworkers noticed I was happier, more present, though I kept the details private. Ethan and I fell into a new rhythm that felt like a natural evolution of what we'd always had. We still played video games and watched movies and had the same stupid arguments, but now I could kiss him when he was being particularly annoying, and he could pull me close whenever he wanted. There were challenges, of course. Learning to navigate physical intimacy took time and communication, and we approached it carefully, always checking in with each other, always making sure we were on the same page. Some nights we'd just hold each other, content with closeness and soft conversations. Other nights tension would build slowly between us, a heat that had been simmering since that first kiss. And we'd explore what that meant together, with patience and laughter and care, but the foundation of our relationship remained unchanged trust, respect, genuine liking of each other as people. The romance was built on top of years of friendship, which gave it a stability I'd never experienced before. When we had disagreements, we talked through them. When one of us had a bad day, the other was there. We were partners in every sense of the word, and the transition felt surprisingly seamless. 3 months after that conversation in the parking garage, Ethan officially moved into my apartment. It made sense, he'd been spending almost every night there anyway, and his lease was up. We made space for his things, combining our lives in physical ways that mirrored the emotional combining we'd already done. His books on my shelves, his coffee mug next to mine, his toothbrush in the holder. Evidence of this life we were building together. One evening, as we were cooking dinner together, something we'd done hundreds of times before. But now Ethan would drop kisses on my shoulder as he moved past. I found myself overwhelmed with gratitude. For Marcus's advice, for Ethan's courage, for my own eventual willingness to take the risk. All the things that could have gone wrong but didn't. All the ways this could have ended badly, but instead ended in happiness. "What are you thinking about?" Ethan asked, noticing my silence. He was chopping vegetables while I stirred sauce, domestic and comfortable in a way that made my chest warm. I set down the spoon and turned to face him. Taking in the sight of him in my our kitchen, with that soft smile he seemed to reserve just for me. "I'm thinking about how lucky I am," I said honestly. Ethan set down the knife and moved closer, wrapping his arms around my waist from behind. He rested his chin on my shoulder, and we stood like that for a moment, swaying slightly to music only we could hear. "I'm the lucky one," he murmured against my ear. "You took a chance on us. That took courage." I leaned back against him, letting his warmth envelop me. "We both did," I corrected. "You were brave enough to say something. I was brave enough to listen." I turned in his arms until we were face to face, my hands coming up to rest on his chest. "We're building something here, Ethan. Something good and real and lasting." He nodded, his eyes soft with emotion, and kissed me gently. It was the kind of kiss that spoke of promises and tomorrows, of a future we were creating together. The sauce started to bubble over, breaking the moment, and we both laughed as I rushed to turn down the heat. Crisis averted. We finished making dinner together, talking about our days and planning for the weekend. It was ordinary and extraordinary all at once. The mundane act of making a meal transformed by the knowledge that this was our life now. This was what we'd chosen, what we'd fought our fear to create. That night, curled up together on the couch after dinner, Ethan's head on my chest and my fingers running through his hair, I thought about how far we'd come. From that afternoon, when he'd walked into my apartment while I was gaming, to the parking garage confession, to now, Every moment had been necessary, even the scary ones. Especially the scary ones. They'd brought us here to this place of contentment and love. "Hey," Ethan said softly, tilting his head to look up at me. "Thank you." I raised an eyebrow. "For what?" He was quiet for a moment, seeming to search for the right words. "For being willing to risk it," he said finally. "For loving me enough to try, even though you were scared. For choosing me, choosing us, every single day." Vulnerability in that moment. The raw honesty of his gratitude made my throat tight with emotion. I bent down and kissed his forehead, a gesture of tenderness that had become second nature. "Always," I promised. "I'll always choose you." And I meant it with every fiber of my being. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever obstacles we might face, I knew with absolute certainty that this was where I was meant to be. With him, with us. Building a life one day, one moment, one choice at a time. Ethan smiled. That brilliant smile that still made my heart skip a beat and settled back against my chest with a contented sigh. Outside, the city moved on with its usual chaos and noise. But inside our apartment, our home, everything was exactly as it should be. Two people who'd been brave enough to see what had been there all along, who'd chosen love over fear, together over apart. It wasn't always easy, but it was always worth it. And as I held Ethan close, listening to his breathing even out as he drifted towards sleep, I felt a peace settle over me that I'd never known before. This was what I'd been searching for all along, not just love, but the right love. Not just a partner, but my partner. The person who knew all my flaws and loved me anyway, who challenged me to be better while accepting who I was. My best friend, my love. My home, the future stretched out before us, full of possibility and promise. There would be more challenges, more fears to face, more moments where we'd have to choose courage over comfort. But we'd face them together, and that made all the difference. Because love, real love, wasn't about never being scared. It was about being scared and choosing each other anyway. It was about taking the leap and trusting that the other person would be there to catch you. And Ethan would always be there to catch me, just as I would always be there to catch him. That was the promise we'd made, spoken and unspoken. In every kiss, in every conversation, in every quiet moment of simply being together, we'd found something rare and precious, and we both knew it. We'd protect it, nurture it, let it grow into whatever it was meant to become. As I felt myself drifting towards sleep, Ethan warm and solid in my arms. I thought about that afternoon months ago when I'd been playing video games alone in my apartment. How I'd been so focused on beating a level, so caught up in my own head, that I'd jumped when Ethan walked in. I smiled at the memory. I'd been playing by myself, stuck and frustrated, going nowhere. And then my best friend had entered and everything had changed. He'd helped me beat that level. But more importantly, he'd helped me see what had been right in front of me all along. The greatest adventure wasn't in any game or distant dream, it was right here. The everyday miracle of being known and loved and chosen. It was in the courage to be vulnerable, to say I love you and mean it with your whole heart. It was in the decision to build a life with someone. It's one small moment at a time. The game I'd been so intent on winning that afternoon didn't matter anymore. I'd won something so much better, a partnership, a love story, a future filled with possibility. And it had started with a simple moment. I was playing with myself. Then my best friend entered. And nothing had been the same since. Nor would I want it to be. This sus was worth every moment of fear, every risk, every leap of faith. This was everything.